This is the brand new Garmin Vivoactive 6, and the Vivoactive series from Garmin has always been designed for that general wellness and fitness crowd, but not really designed as sort of a dedicated sport or running watch. But with the Vivoactive 6, Garmin seems to have changed their mind on that, and they've added a whole lot of new functionality to this watch to make it a lot more like something like a Garmin Forerunner in a Vivoactive package. Now, I've only had the Vivoactive 6 for a few days now, but in this video, I wanted to give you my initial impressions after using this watch for those few days in both my everyday life and also going on several runs with this watch and collecting all of that sweet data. We'll talk through some of the new features, and along the way, we'll also look at things like GPS and heart rate performance. Now, before we get all the way into this, I just want to mention that I don't plan to read through every spec and every little detail from Garmin's website. If you want to do that, you can head over to their website and read that for yourself. In this video, I just want to focus on what's new with the new Garmin Vivoactive 6 as compared to the previous model and some of the other lineup. We're going to stick to some of the important facts about this watch that you absolutely need to know if you're interested in it. A lot of what exists in the Vivoactive 6 here already existed in the previous generation Vivoactive 5 here. And as you can see, I've got both watches on the table, and if you were looking at these from a distance, you probably wouldn't be able to tell them apart. They basically look identical. They have a very similar display. To be clear here, the Vivoactive 6 is with the blue text on the left, and the 5 is with the green text on the right. Now let's talk about what's the same between these two watches. One great thing that's the same between the two of them is the price. Both these watches, when they were announced, were the same exact price, coming in at $299 here in the USA. Another thing that's the same, like I said, is the look, design, and dimensions of these watches. Largely, they look identical. Really, the only standout difference between the two in terms of looks is if you flip them on their sides, the start-stop button there on the Vivoactive 6 is much larger and more pronounced, and it's actually raised up a bit so you can feel it a little bit easier with your finger, and I do appreciate that. Both the 5 and the 6 come in at the same 42 millimeters in diameter, and they are both 28 grams in weight, so they're very light watches, very comfortable to wear throughout the day or sleeping with. You barely notice it's there. And on top of that, both of these have the same display. Both have a 1.2-inch AMOLED touch-enabled display. They're both very responsive and quick to respond to touch interactions. The one difference about the 6 is that it does have a slightly brighter display. Now, when it comes to controlling the new Vivoactive 6, like I said, it's the same 2-button design on the side here, which means you're going to be interacting with this watch mainly from the display. You'll need to use the touch interactions to navigate around the menu. Unlike the Forerunner series or Fenix series that have a 5-button layout, you can actually turn off the touchscreen entirely if it's raining or you're doing something where you're sweating a lot. This one, you'll have to interact with the display. So just keep that in mind. And if I flip these watches over, the Garmin Vivoactive 6 on the left here also has the exact same heart rate sensor as the Vivoactive 5. And in my opinion, that is a bit of a miss because Garmin has come out with a new Generation 5 heart rate sensor that you'll find on something like the Garmin Fenix 8 on the left here, and this does offer ECG and wrist temperature functions that are not available on the new Vivoactive 6. I don't think that would have cost them too much more to implement, but that seems like a line they drew in the sand. With that being said, the older Gen 4 heart rate sensor in my testing has performed pretty well, and we will look at that later in this video, so it's not a huge problem. More on the trend of what's the same between these two watches, they both feature the same all systems GPS chipset, which is pretty good from Garmin, and we'll look at that later in this video. However, the new Vivoactive 6 does get an additional satellite, so I believe it's 5 satellites versus 4 satellites, so it should be theoretically a little bit more accurate. And the final similarity between these two watches is going to be the battery life. Both these watches have the same claimed 11 days of typical use and 21 hours in a GPS activity, which is pretty good for a watch like this. Hey there, quick interruption. If you're finding this video fun or helpful at all, I'd really appreciate it if you went down, gave me a thumbs up, and subscribe to the channel down below so you don't miss more videos from me in the future. Okay, let's get back to the video. Now that we're done with all the similarities between these two, let's talk about what's new on the Garmin Vivoactive 6. The first thing that's really the only hardware change under the hood is going to be an increase in internal storage. For music and apps, if you want to download them, internal storage is a nice thing to have. The older Vivoactive 5 only had 4 gigabytes of storage. The new one gets 8 gigabytes of storage, which is nice to have for all of your podcasts and music needs. Now let's talk about what's arguably the biggest change between these two watches from the Vivoactive 5 to the 6, and that's going to be the software or operating system. it's been completely redesigned from the ground up. If I scroll down through the widgets of the Vivoactive 5 and 6, the 6 being on the left, you can see that all the widgets look a little bit different. They've got these rounded designs and gradient colors to them. There's a little bit more data that you can see at a glance, as opposed to the rather simple interface on the Vivoactive 5 with these sort of colored brackets around each widget. And if I dive into something like body battery, for example, even the graphs look a little bit different. Keep in mind, I have not been wearing the Vivoactive 5, so it doesn't really have any data, but you get the idea that everything just looks a little bit different. And the real big change is when you get to something like the activity menu. You can see on the left, you've got this rounded pill-shaped activities button at the top with all of your apps below that, where on the old design, you had the activities/apps button at the top. You'd toggle left and right depending what you want to look at, and then you could access your apps or activities. You get the same information, but it's just laid out a little bit differently, and in my opinion, it's a lot cleaner on the new Vivoactive 6. The interface on the new Vivoactive 6 looks a lot more like what you'd find on the Garmin Fenix 8 or the higher end models, where they got that completely overhauled software system, and it's just a little bit easier to look at and navigate through as opposed to the older design. One of the big new features announced with the new Vivoactive 6 is something called smart alarms. Now, this is basically just an alarm clock, so don't get too excited, but it is a smart alarm clock. And to access it, you can scroll down in your apps here, go to clocks, and when you create an alarm, I've got one set up here for 6 a.m. If I dive into that, I can scroll down and there's an option here for Smart Wake. Now, by enabling this, you get this little prompt explaining what it's going to do. It says the Smart Wake alarm is designed to wake you up gently at the optimal time based on your sleep. If you achieve sufficient sleep, it will attempt to wake you up within 30-minute window ahead of your set alarm. And by doing that, it will gently vibrate the watch on your wrist to sort of gradually wake you up out of sleep, rather than having just a jarring alarm go off at that mark when you set your alarm. And again, this smart alarm is intelligent in a way that it knows how you slept that night and whether or not you actually need that extra 30 minutes of sleep, or if you've got enough and you can gently wake up and take on the day ahead. That's basically all I want to talk about with the new user interface on the Vivoactive 6. Now let's talk about the more activity-related things like going out on your run. For example, here, one of the biggest changes on the Vivoactive 6 is the addition of a lot more activity profiles. The Vivoactive 5 on the right here had a good amount. You've got all the basics for running, walking, biking, strength, etc. But if I go down and add more, there's a pretty limited list on what you can include in your activity menu. Indoor running, navigation, open water, paddle, pickleball, etc., but nothing like outdoorsy. So there's no hiking, there's no trail running option. That's all limited on the Vivoactive 5. Now, jumping over to the Vivoactive 6 here, if I dive into the activity menu on this one and scroll down, you're gonna notice way more activity profiles. In fact, they've added just about 50 activity profiles to this watch, and they're categorized in these main categories that you can drop down menu and see subcategories for swimming, cycling, gym, outdoor, winter sports, water sports, team sports like soccer, baseball, etc., racket sports, motorsports, and others. Now, if we jump back up and we look at outdoor, for example, you can see here we've got options for like hiking, mountaineering, etc., and these options simply weren't available on the Vivoactive 5. So that is good to see that Garmin's realized they should just add all of the activity profiles to most of their watches. There is one asterisk here though, in that they still haven't added multi-sport activities, so you can't perform a triathlon or multi-sport mode on this watch. I do think that's kind of an interesting choice, given that at $299 for this watch, there are competitors out there from other brands that offer triathlon modes at that price point, but that is what Garmin chose to do. Another change to activities on the new Vivoactive 6 is that they did add suggested workouts, which is really cool. And that's something you get, again, on the higher end models like the Forerunners and Fenix models, where when you enter an activity, it will give you a suggested workout to do based on that activity. Now, unfortunately, this is another weird choice on the Garmin Vivoactive 6. That suggested workout function is limited to walking only. You can only get suggested workouts based on walking. Now, I don't know about you, but for me and for the circle of friends that I have, whether they're athletes or not, I don't know of too many people doing walking workouts, like structured workouts for walking. I suppose they exist, and if you're in that niche bucket of people who do walking workouts, you might find this useful. Another new feature on the new Garmin Vivoactive 6 is the ability to use the mobility activity. And this is interesting because currently in the whole Garmin lineup, whether or not you you buy a $3,000 watch or a $200 watch, the Garmin Vivoactive 6 is the only watch that has the mobility activity. And this is for strength and stretching and mobility. And if you go down, you can actually add mobility structured workouts as well. And when you do start a mobility workout, for example, if I hit start here, you will see that it actually records each move in that mobility workout. I probably should do more mobility. I haven't done a lot of it in the past, so maybe this will be a good reason to start. Another new feature when it comes to activities on the new Vivoactive 6 is workout animations for strength training. For example, here, if I go into my strength training profile and I scroll down to workouts, you can see here I've loaded one called Back to Basics. I can click in on that. It shows me a little heat map on what muscles I'd be working out with this. I can go ahead and click do workout. And now it's gonna prompt me to do barbell deadlifts. And as you can see here, I get a little animation directly on the watch to actually see how to perform that exercise. Now, it doesn't have to be barbell deadlifts. It could be something more complicated. Maybe you don't understand. Having that little diagram and an animation telling you what to do is pretty helpful. Another software update to the Garmin Vivoactive 6 related to activities is something I've wanted for a very long time. For the longest time, including the older Vivoactive 5 and a lot of Forerunner models, Garmin would limit how much data you could have per page in an activity, and they would limit that to only 4 data fields or 4 bits of data that you could view at a given time. Now that didn't make sense to me because these watches have super high resolution screens with a lot of availability for real estate, and you see that on their higher end models like Forerunners and Fenixes, and now we get that here as well on the Garmin Vivoactive 6. You can see here on this data page, if I go into layout and scroll down, I have the ability to add up to 8 data fields on the Garmin Vivoactive 6. That is a ton of information to see at a glance, and thanks to that really high resolution OLED display, it's still very readable even with all that information. Thank you, Garmin, but please add this to all of your other models as well, including the Garmin Forerunner 165, the Vivoactive 5, and anything with an AMOLED display, because it just didn't make sense to me why that was limited in the past. Another addition to the Garmin Vivoactive 6, if we dive into the options here in an activity, I can scroll down and I can go ahead and add a compass to my activity. So if you're doing something like hiking or trail running, you now have the ability to have a compass on board in your activity and as a widget from the home screen. Again, that was never available on the Vivoactive series. Moving right along to running specific features on the new Vivoactive 6. Garmin again has added some really advanced training tools to the Vivoactive 6 that previously was only available in higher tier options. This includes a whole bunch more running dynamics when you take this watch out for a run. Now you'll get things like power, ground contact time, vertical oscillation, stride length, etc. that you just wouldn't get in a Vivoactive watch before. So if I dive into my last running activity here, you can see on my phone I've got my chart for pace, heart rate, and as I scroll down, I get training effect, elevation, and then we get running power. Now this is really interesting because this watch doesn't have a barometric altimeter built in, and I thought it actually needed that to collect running power data, but Garmin somehow figured out a way to record running power without that sensor. And what's more interesting is that if I compare this to my Garmin Fenix 8 or Tactics 8 I'm wearing now, the running power and all of the metrics actually look very similar between the two watches. So it's still just as accurate as their other Garmin watches when it comes to wrist-based power, just without that additional sensor. To be honest, most people aren't going to use this data, but it is good that it's now collecting it and they're not just holding it back to more expensive models. Another new feature on the Vivoactive 6 is the ability to use Pace Pro pacing strategies. So here on my phone, I can dive into Pace Pro, and from here I've already got a couple up top here, but I'll create a new one. And what this will do is allow you to design a pacing strategy based on terrain, elevation gain, and your splits. So if you want to design a pace strategy that has a negative split, so you're running faster at the end of the race than the beginning of the race, and then have that correlate to the elevation of that course, you can do that here in Pace Pro and sync it over to your watch to follow in real time. Next up, let's talk about navigation and mapping on the new Garmin Vivoactive 6. Again, this was a feature always missing from Garmin Venue and Vivoactive models. Even something like the Garmin Venue 3 I have here had a very limited form of navigation. It basically just had an arrow giving you a bearing and what direction you should go in. Now on the Garmin Vivoactive 6, we actually get proper breadcrumb maps. Now don't get too excited. This is still not full offline mapping. You can't download a base map and see roads and trails and points of interest and all that stuff that you get with higher end models like the Forerunner. 965 and the Fenix and all of them. But still, breadcrumb navigation is very powerful and really all most people need. You can design a course in Garmin Connect on your phone or on the website, and you can sync that course over to the watch and follow it in real time. And of course, with that breadcrumb navigation and mapping, you can add that breadcrumb map page to any of your activities. One thing that is a little bit frustrating with the mapping on the Vivoactive 6 is the panning and zooming function. They're a little finicky. There's only on-screen controls for zooming in, zooming out, and panning up and down and left and right, and you can't simply like pinch and zoom or tap and drag or any of that stuff. It works, but I just wish it was a little bit easier to use when you're panning and zooming. So we've hit that point in the video where we're gonna talk about GPS modes and accuracy. Like I said at the beginning of this video, the GPS chipset within the Garmin Vivoactive 6 is very similar to the Vivoactive 5, though it has been enhanced ever so slightly. This watch is not a dual band or multi-frequency GNSS device. However, it is an all systems GNSS device, which is still very good. In my testing so far, with a few limited runs I've done, it's gotten pretty solid results, and I really don't have a lot of complaints about it. As you can see here, I'm panning around a map showing the Garmin Vivoactive 6 compared to the Garmin Tactix 8, and the Tactix 8 being a $1,400 watch that is dual band enabled. And as you can see, overall, the GPS tracks look pretty similar. Both have deviations here or there, but largely, they're both looking pretty good, and I really don't have any complaints about either one. It's still early days in terms of testing the GPS on this watch, but because it's so similar to the Vivoactive 5, I'm not too worried about it, and I'm sure it's gonna be perfectly fine for most activities. And that thought is gonna follow through to the heart rate accuracy from the built-in optical heart rate sensor on the back of the Vivoactive 6. Again, I've tested this heart rate sensor numerous times on countless watches. And in my testing, it's very good. It's not quite as good as the newer sensor found on the Venue 3 or the Garmin Fenix 8. It does struggle in some situations, but for generally running, hiking, that sort of thing, I really don't have any major issues with this heart rate sensor. But I'll repeat myself again, it's still early days with the Garmin Vivoactive 6, even though I've tested this heart rate sensor a lot in the past. And that brings us to the end of this video, where I want to talk final thoughts and initial impressions after using the Vivoactive 6 after a few days. Well, I think in a way, this one's pretty easy. If you were looking at the older Garmin Vivoactive 5 as your next wearable and you're ready to pull the trigger on it, just get the Vivoactive 6. I mean, they're basically the same watch, and in just about every way, the Vivoactive 6 is better, and it's the same price, unless you can find the 5 on sale significantly cheaper. Still though, unless it's way cheaper, I'd probably say just get the 6, so you're kind of future-proof. On the other hand, if you weren't specifically interested in the Vivoactive 5 or the Vivoactive series in general, and you're looking for a smartwatch at $299 in that price range, that's where things can get a little bit more complicated. The new Vivoactive 6 is great, don't get me wrong. I like the menu system, I like all of the new features, the smart alarm, whatever. It's all really nice, but if you are someone looking for a dedicated sport watch for running or hiking or cycling, that sort of thing, in this price range, there's a lot of competition. For example, in Garmin's own lineup, they have the cheaper Garmin Forerunner 165, and that has a lot of the same features as the Vivoactive 6 for less money. It also comes with 5 buttons on board, so you don't always have to use the touchscreen to do just about everything. With that, you can turn off the touchscreen and still access all of the functions. And then you've got competitors like the COROS Pace Pro coming in at $350, which has a ton of training-specific features, longer battery life, and a nice bright AMOLED display. And that watch, again, is a little bit more geared towards sports and fitness and running and all those things, where the Vivoactive 6 is more of that general fitness, wellness kind of thing, if that makes sense. And then there's also the Suunto Race S. That's only a little bit more expensive than this at $350. It does have a way more premium build with a metal bezel and a more rugged aesthetic for that outdoor crowd, if you prefer that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, all of those watches aren't really competitors to the Garmin Vivoactive 6. This is more for that everyday crowd that just wants to have a really nice smartwatch that has all the Garmin capabilities like body battery, really good sleep detection, all of those things in an attractive package. And I gotta say, the Vivoactive 6 is the most capable Vivoactive ever, and it's really blurring the lines between something like a Vivoactive and the Forerunner models. I wonder how this is gonna progress over the coming years, because as features get added to this series, it makes me wonder why both series exists at the end of the day. Ultimately, the Vivoactive 6 is a nice looking watch with a good set of features at a reasonable price. But that's just my opinion, and now I want to hear from you in the comments down below. Are you interested in the Garmin Vivoactive 6? Did you run out and buy one? What do you think about it so far? Do you think that Garmin should have just added this software to the old one? I'd love to hear your opinion on that as well. Drop into the comments down below and let me know what you think. And as always, after you're done commenting down there, I would highly appreciate it if you drop down and give me a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel down below so you don't miss more videos from me in the future. And then after you do that, also check out the description down below where I have a whole bunch of links for the Garmin Vivoactive 6, all the competing models I just mentioned, the Vivoactive 5, and I'll have a bunch of things listed down there, as well as my other social media profiles like my Strava, my Instagram, my website where you can buy some sweet merch like this, and of course check out my podcast, Distance Junkie, available on Apple, Spotify, and here on YouTube as well. And with that, I gotta go for a run now, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye! Too trippy, get it cracking like a levy. I'ma show 'em all how to party if they let me. Cue the countdown and release the confetti.